All right, let's dive straight into this grade 9 blueprint explainer for Simon Armitage's incredible poem Remains. Look, if you're gearing up for your English Lit exams, you already know this text is an absolute heavyweight in the power and conflict anthology. It's one of those poems that hits you right where it hurts from the very first line, and it just doesn't let go. So today, we're going to break down exactly what makes this poem tick, giving you the top-tier analysis you need to completely ace your exam. To really get to the heart of this text, we've got to ask ourselves a pretty heavy question. What actually happens when the war zone follows you home? How on earth do soldiers carry the psychological weight of conflict long after the shooting stops, and they're supposedly back to normal civilian life? Realizing that the true battlefield in this poem isn't some distant desert, but the human mind itself, well, that's your key to unlocking those higher grades. So, here's our game plan for building those analytical skills today. First up, context and chaos. Second, the language of guilt. Third, we'll look at breaking the structure. And finally, we'll tackle that crucial grade 9 comparison. Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, Context and Chaos. You know, examiners absolutely love it when you bridge the gap between the text and the real world. So tying the poem to guardsman traumas and the awareness of PTSD is just a fantastic, easy way to pick up vital marks. Armitage actually wrote this for a 2007 Channel 4 documentary called The Not Dead, which shone a light on the severe impact of war on returning soldiers. It's based on a real, living person, Guardsman Tromans, who served in Iraq back in 2003. Armitage's ultimate goal here was to shift public opinion on modern warfare and really raise awareness of post-traumatic stress disorder. He wants us to feel genuine empathy for those internal, invisible injuries of conflict. To truly capture that chaotic reality, Armitage literally drops us right into the thick of it using a technique called in media res. It's a great term to use in your essays because it brilliantly illustrates the sudden, wildly unpredictable nature of military deployment. The poem just casually opens with, "On another occasion, we get sent out." Boom. As a reader, you are immediately disoriented. There's no polite introduction, no scene setting, and this deliberate structural choice perfectly mirrors the confusion of the soldiers themselves, who are just launched into high-stakes, life-or-death situations with zero emotional preparation. Moving swiftly on to Section 2, the language of guilt. Pay close attention to how the vocabulary actually shifts as the soldier's trauma deepens. The language Armitage chooses is so incredibly deliberate. The conflict here isn't a physical battle in a distant land anymore. It's a psychological war trapped entirely inside his own head as this relentless blood shadow. At the start, the speaker uses really casual, colloquial language, words like "legsit" and "mates," to describe some genuinely horrific, gruesome stuff. It's clearly a coping mechanism, right? But as the poem progresses and the soldier goes home on leave, that tough facade totally crumbles. The trauma just invades his domestic life. He literally can't close his eyes without the war zone bursting back through. And that brings us to the absolute crucial point. The pun on the word bloody in this devastating final line, "His bloody life in my bloody hands." Early on in the text, soldiers might use bloody as just a slang swear word, a casual way to brush off the horror of what they're seeing. But here at the very end, it transitions away from slang and becomes a grim, literal symbol of inescapable guilt. The memory is permanently stained onto his conscience. It's actually a lot like Lady Macbeth's desperately stained hands. In both of these texts, blood serves as the ultimate motif for a psychological burden that simply cannot be washed away. All right, let's look at Section 3, breaking the structure. Look, if you are chasing those top grades, you can't just analyze words. You've got to talk about structure. Armitage actually manipulates the physical shape of the poem to mimic a breaking mind. Notice how the enjambment causes the lines to just bleed into one another across the stanzas? He's not just doing that to make it sound conversational. It perfectly mirrors how the soldier's traumatic memories are flowing unstoppably into his present reality. He's entirely unable to compartmentalize these events. Just as the sentences refuse to end at the line breaks, his trauma stubbornly refuses to stay in the past. And right alongside that flowing enjambment, we get the exact opposite, caesura. This is your secret weapon for analysis, seriously. Take the line, "Then I'm home on leave." But I blink. Those heavy full stops right smack in the middle of the line violently interrupt the rhythm. Going home is supposed to be a time of peace, a time of finality. But instead, just as violent flashbacks keep interrupting his attempt at a normal life, the caesura aggressively interrupts the flow of the poem itself. We also really need to highlight his use of anaphora. The speaker repeats the phrase "probably armed, possibly not" multiple times. This anaphora creates this inescapable cyclical structure. trapping the reader in the exact same looping guilt that's haunting the soldier. He's endlessly, obsessively agonizing over whether the shooting was actually justified. Was the guy a threat? He just doesn't know. And that looping uncertainty is the absolute core of his psychological torture. And check this out. This total breakdown of the soldier's mental state is also represented by stanza length, specifically the number 2. Throughout the whole poem, Armitage uses these highly controlled 4-line stanzas, but then that final stanza dramatically drops down to just 2 lines. The narrative just cannot sustain itself anymore. His illusion of control has completely, irreparably shattered. Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, the Grade 9 comparison. Comparing Remains to another poem in the anthology is usually the toughest skill for any lit student, but bringing in Ted Hughes' Bayonet Charge is a brilliant route to those top marks. When you compare these two, you really want to zero in on the core differences in timing, perspective, and structure. In Remains, we're looking at the long aftermath of violence through a highly personal, first-person confession. It almost sounds like a therapy session. But in contrast, Bayonet Charge thrusts us into the immediate, chaotic moment of an attack, using a third-person limited perspective and frantic free verse to capture the sheer, unfiltered panic of a soldier running for his life. So how do we actually tie that all together in an essay? Well, while both of these poems completely reject the shiny propaganda of heroic war, their actual focus is entirely different. Armitage focuses on the long-term haunting of survival, the enduring psychological damage, and the heavy guilt of taking a life. Hughes, on the flip side, focuses on the immediate panicked instinct of simply trying not to lose your own life. One is about a mind being slowly destroyed by memory. The other is about a mind being completely overwhelmed by the present moment. As you wrap up your revision notes for this text, I want to leave you with this to chew on. If the physical war ends the second the soldier leaves the battlefield, when does the psychological war end? Does Armitage actually give us any hope whatsoever that the mental torment will ever truly stop for this soldier? It's a pretty dark place to finish, but grappling with that exact lack of resolution is what makes Remains such a masterpiece of modern conflict poetry. Take this analytical framework straight into your essays, and you'll be well on your way to acing your exams. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and best of luck with your revision.